Welcome to Two Truths, where we explore controversial topics in religion, philosophy, and history from at least two different perspectives. I'm Dr. Iammarino, and today we're going to be talking about Lilith. So here's sort of the layout for this one in terms of the two truths. I'm going to look at the origins and character traits of Lilith first, and then shift gears into how do you stop her? Okay? What techniques have come up over the hundreds and hundreds of years to deal with the malevolent aspects of her? Okay? So that's the plan. Let's dive in here. Generally, when talking about the origins of Lilith, you'll frequently hear people go back to the Sumerian, so going way back, 2800, 2900 time range BCE, and looking at a goddess known as Lamashtu. Now, there's good reason for this because they seem to be very much the same in terms of character traits. So let's do a quick little survey of Lamashtu and Mesopotamian demonology. So Lamashtu was either created by one of two options: Anu or Enki. Now, Enki is like the trickster god, and in the oldest account that we have, he kind of gets the credit for creating her. But it's more commonly understood that it's Anu. Now, here's a brief little quote explaining this. Lamashtu was born of the union of Anu and Antu, and was raised in the heavens among other gods and goddesses. So it's interesting, this idea of sort of being up there, if you will, almost like on Mount Olympus type thing, in this elite territory with important gods and goddesses. But with Lamashtu, there's going to be this expulsion and being kicked out, ostracized from heaven, and being forced to roam the wastelands. This is pretty common sort of belief in the ancient world that if you were to go through the desert or an area of where there's ruins or something like this, just your general wasteland type terminology, that's a very dangerous place to be. Spiritually dangerous, right? Not just physically dangerous. You will encounter lots of different demons in these regions, okay? Now, Lamashtu gets basically painted or characterized as being pretty scary, malevolent, jealous, aggressive, nothing that seems really too redeeming or positive in the way of character traits. And it's unfortunate if we were to look at it through a more contemporary lens, because it's definitely a sort of demonizing, right, of many female elements. But nevertheless, Lamashtu is going to play a very important role, okay? The fear side of it is that she could kill any baby, mess with pregnant mothers, possibly kill pregnant mothers, drink the blood of men, conceive children even, as we'll get into the Lilith situation. That's more of a concern. And as time goes on, it's almost like, anything negative, you can kind of just plaster it onto her. So, for example, disease, killing of crops or plants, it's just, it all can be where she's wholly or partially responsible for these sort of things. Now, another bizarre kind of element here is that there's this idea that she has 7 names and his seven witches. This idea you might hear much later, that you might be familiar at least with in the New Testament, where we think about like Mary Magdalene, right? Here's another important female figure in the Christian tradition who's maligned, and not rightfully so. And if we were to look at like Luke 11:26, 8:2, Matthew 12:45, I think are some of the examples, you'll hear this, oh, she had 7, right? Like 7 evil spirits. This idea is pretty common with multiples of 7 or 7 itself. That's pretty typical even throughout the Hebrew Bible. You'll get that. So interesting possible precursor relationship there in terms of demonology. If we look into what the name means, that's where I think we should also make our transition. Okay, like, so that's a little bit about Lamashtu, all right? Not much, but really Lilith is our focus. So let's sort of move forward on the timeline and break down the name. Lilith comes from Lil, which is wind or spirit, or in Akkadian, Lilu or Lilitu, which is a malevolent spirit or spirits, right? One early reference that we have, if we're sort of trying to go chronologically here, you'll hear like Isaiah 34:14 frequently brought up in reference to Lilith. Because, oh, well, here's a possible biblical reference. But I think a better place to look is to look at the Songs of the Sage and look at sort of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's a good place on our timeline where we have a specific example here. And I'll read you this quote. "And I, the instructor, proclaim his glorious splendor, so as to frighten and to terrify all the spirits of the destroying angels, spirits of the bastards, demons, Lilith, howlers, and desert dwellers." And here, Lilith is in the singular, okay? So it very well could be referencing what we come to understand and think of as Lilith here. See, in some of the other texts, interesting if we were to stick with the Dead Sea Scrolls, if we were to look at Isaiah, the whole Isaiah 34:14 reference, Lilith is actually plural in that earliest of manuscripts that we have, which speaks to something that I want to get into, which is that it's not abundantly clear trying to translate a lot of different Hebrew terms, okay? Especially for animals that are more obscure or something. It could be that they're talking about like a screech owl. That's a pretty common translation. Maybe just listed as a general demoness or demon. It isn't abundantly clear. And the reference is like not much anyhow. But I just wanted to point out that it's not always in the singular when we're looking at these early, especially the earliest reference to Isaiah 34:14. Okay? But let's kind of fast forward on the timeline now a little bit and get more to leading up to the Middle Ages here. This is where really the Lilith stories and legends are become intertwined with Adam. Okay? I feel like that's something, if people are familiar with Lilith at all, they're normally familiar with this story, which is going to be coming from the alphabet of Ben Sirah, 700 to 1000 basically CE, somewhere in that range. And it's got a lot of just different stories in this text, folklore, and what have you. But what you get that's so famous or infamous, I guess, is this account of, it's an attempt to harmonize Genesis 1 in the creation account there in Genesis 1:27 to be precise. And then the account in Genesis 2 where it's not the same, right? In Genesis 1, it's like male and female, they were created, if you will. Whereas in Genesis 2, it's Adam, right? And then Eve is going to be created effectively from Adam's side, right? Or rib, right? And the idea here is like, well, all right, we've got these two different creation stories. In the first one, it seems to suggest something more like equality as opposed to the second creation account, which definitely seems to make the female sort of, contingent, right, upon the male and possibly subservient. So what happens in this story is there's basically this like folk tale brought in about how Lilith was actually like the first wife or something like this, right, of Adam. Okay, and it didn't go well. She basically states like, hey, we're both from the dust and we're both equal, and Adam wants to take control and be in a position of power, and she's just flat out not having it. And it's specifically during like sexual intercourse that this is a problem, where they both basically want to be on top, okay? And she's not gonna give in. And so she bails. She pronounces the name of God, right? She basically pronounces Yahweh, runs away, flies away, and goes to the Sea of Reeds or Red Sea or whatever. And basically 3 angels are sent to bring her back, right? So there's a whole lot of stuff going on. And we could bring in other threads. We don't really have the time, I don't think, to go into all this. So we'll stay on point here. And long story short, the angels, the 3 angels who are named, but I'll spare you that and get to that when we talk about how to like stop or deal with Lilith. These 3 angels sort of negotiate with her and they carve out a deal basically. And that's kind of the gist of that story, right? That like folk tale. But I think that one sticks in the mind. And it's kind of a crazy story. It's got like the whole sexual intercourse piece, so it's a little more provocative because of that. And that's what people think of now, right? Now, so that's 700 to 1,000. Is that really all we've got? Maybe a reference in the Bible that's not really much of anything in Isaiah. A reference from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not much. No, there is more, luckily. So the Babylonian Talmud helps to fill in this gap of time. There are 5 references to Lilith, showing how this is like a growing concern for people. And in fact, one short little quote that I think speaks to like the level of paranoia surrounding Lilith is this from the Babylonian Talmud. Anyone who sleeps alone in a house will be seized by Lilith. I mean, men is the primary focus here. Because the idea is like, if a man being alone, and especially if you were to have some sort of sexual dream, that could be how like demons are being created or something along those lines with nocturnal emissions and things like this. As I said, it gets to a pretty big level of paranoia at this stage. It clearly doesn't go down in paranoia given what I just told you before, from the year 700 to 1000, right? That idea of like the sexual dimension and concern is growing in prominence. So, okay, that's a brief little overview. How are we supposed to deal with the great danger that she supposedly represents, right? Let's go chronologically again. Let's go back to Lamashtu for a second. Here's a surprise, probably. If you've seen the movie The Exorcist, the original Exorcist, there's a statue that's problematic in that movie. It's a statue of Pazuzu, the Sumerian king of demons and god of the wind. See, but notice god of the wind and also king of demons, possibly. That's what's relevant. He is associated with similar elements like the wind or something that Lamashtu is going to be associated with, but he's arguably higher, and that's how demonology works, right? Like you have to be at a higher level to be able to push out any lower entity. It's a military type hierarchy, right? So Pazuzu's the general, if you want to look at it that way, instead of even saying like king of demons. And therefore, if you put an image of Pazuzu on your house or in front of a room, by a crib, something like that, that will help to, the image alone will be useful in driving away the malevolent and jealous wrath of Lamashtu and Lilith, if you will, down the road. Similar kind of logic, okay? So we have these sort of images. I'll bring some up where you've got like plaques basically with Pazuzu and possibly even with like outstretched hands and dealing with Lamashtu. Time goes on. With Lamashtu, it's interesting that like, yes, people are terrified of Lamashtu, but guess what? Anything that's terrifying is powerful. So anything that's that powerful, maybe we can beg it to help us, right? You could sacrifice effectively something to try and create a relationship. And that does happen. There's text later on with people like asking Lamashtu for help. She's obviously very powerful, so she should be able to like drive out other negative forces. So interesting, and I think maybe like this could be not the best parallel maybe, but like contemporary parallel. Think about if we were in Mexico, say, and if you have a special affinity for like the Virgin Mary and prayer in that way, but it doesn't seem to be working, right? You've made requests, petitionary sort of prayer or something, and you're not getting what you need or want. Well, you might shift teams, so to speak, and go over to Cult of Santa Muerte, which has a lot of the similar kind of imagery, but now a more maybe almost like, to some at least, dark or ominous tone, and maybe you'll get results that way. So I think like you could kind of see again, like, okay, maybe Cult of Santa Muerte might seem like more dangerous to some people, but people want results. It's that simple, I think. You don't get results, then I'll try out something else, right? So possible kind of example there. So one way to deal with it, with Lamashtu, image of someone who's higher, right? Can stop it. Now, you could also use other, it's not like it's just Pazuzu. There's like day demons So Lamashtu is a night. She's associated with the nighttime. But then there are day demons, okay, in Mesopotamian lore. That makes sense. You can kind of use them to help fight off her influence. Mm-hmm. We move forward in time, and we kind of get closer to Lilith now, okay? There are these magic incantation bowls. I'll bring up an image of it here. You write in a spiral, generally from the interior, spiraling out, and at the bottom center of the bowl, as you can see, there's an image of Lilith, typically, okay? So it's a demon of some kind, but normally named Lilith, and they're like divorce. It's basically like a little divorce contract, sort of like, hey, get out of here and don't come in here and stuff like that. The bowl is placed though upside down underneath the house or the front door. I mean, there are a lot of these that have been found where it's like very common practice. So the idea with it being upside down is like you're trapping it's kind of like a spirit trap, basically. So that's some interesting archaeological evidence, right, from the sort of material culture dealing with all of this. Now, moving forward, I mentioned that there are 3 angels that are sent to negotiate with Lilith, and they are named. So, Sanoi, Sansanoi, and Samangelof, possibly. Don't quote me on how to pronounce, especially the last one. Now, these 3 angels, part of the negotiation that's worked out is that Lilith is basically like, if I see your images or your name written over, in a house, on a crib or something, right? I will pass that one by, and I will not mess with them, with that mother or that baby. So that was part of their like haggling it out thing, which means people do that, right? They make these talismans and amulets with those 3 names on it. So if you're looking for a simple way, that should be your easiest option, is putting down the names of those 3 angels. You could tie a red string to your crib. You can try and deal with other forms of your own negotiation with sacrifices, probably a much more dangerous game. But the most common way to deal with it now, rather than putting like a bowl, let's say, upside down, is like a talisman. Like more contemporary, I guess, or not contemporary, maybe like 17th, 18th century, something like that. Utilizing a talisman. Okay. Is that going to work? Who knows? But if we were to now move to like one final thing for this video, Lilith pretty much represents like the ultimate, I would say, in power of the feminine, right? Of this like rebellious. It's very much sounds almost like a Luciferian, right, type of rebellion, but in more of like a female figure. And that's why even currently, I believe there's a challenging character in a game, Diablo 4, that has a Lilith, right, as a name. So it's like, it's in pop culture now, even, right? Whether it's in movies, books, or even video games, right? So not likely that her legend or story will just fade away anytime soon, okay? And there you have it. Please feel free to comment. I don't always say that on my videos, but I absolutely encourage any comments. Happy to engage on it. I'd like to hear your thoughts. For anyone who's seen my other videos, you'll probably know that I typically have my little sign off by saying it's best that we stay gray, because it's really never abundantly clear where things really should end up with the issues that we cover on this channel. So with that, let's heat it and let's stay gray. Until next time.